So, hello everyone, and welcome to a one-to-one sit-down with my guest today, Bronwen Verncombe. Bronwen, welcome, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Raj. Nice to be here.
Bronwen, I'm just going to do a quick intro for you. You are a property investor and author, and within the space of a few short years, you've managed to replace your corporate income, and you've replaced that with your rental property portfolio. And you then managed to travel the world for 12 months, and you've pretty much been working remotely on your property business ever since. Now, if that doesn't sound like a property dream to most people, I don't know what does. And today we're just going to get a bit more of an understanding as to how you were able to do that. So, can you go back to the beginning? Can you share a little bit about how you started in property and a bit about your journey?
Absolutely. Listening to you say that, it still doesn't feel real, but it absolutely is. So let me rewind. It feels like it was just a couple of years ago, but it was about 6 years ago now that
Hmm.
I was in that corporate rat race, commuting long hours, just accepting that that was what everybody did. I didn't see my two children, my elderly mother, my husband. He always comes last. um, and I just felt that, I think the final straw was, I was told by Lloyd's Bank that I couldn't draw my pension until I was 67 years old. And I thought, crikey, if I've got to work until that age, where are all my dreams going to be? Dreams to travel, dreams to volunteer, give back, do things that I never thought, I'd be able to do. And so really property came about as a bit of an accident, in that we needed to really work out how we were managing our savings, little bit of savings. We didn't have that much. We just inherited a bit of money from John's mother, actually, who had died. And we thought, how do we put this money to work in the best way possible? We didn't feel stocks and shares was going to be great, because it had crashed hugely. All my Lloyds Bank shares were worth next to nothing. But when you added them all up, they were worth something. And we thought, well, why don't we give it a go? Let's scrape all that money together. And we bought a flat in Winchester, near where we live. And we knew that it would rent well. It's a great commuting city into London. And we thought, well, we could just about afford a flat. And that's what we did. And then we thought, now what do we do? We don't know anything about being a landlords. And we felt that, as a banker myself, I felt that, I really needed to make sure I did everything according to the rules. And bought a book called Property Magic by Simon Zucci. And that opened our eyes up to the world of investing, that wasn't just, buy a property, put all your money in it, and then wait until you've earned enough for the next deposit. It was much more about different strategies, different ways of working with other people's money. So really, it was, for us, it was start learning with an expert, learn with somebody who's doing this, who can give us the confidence and the knowledge as to how to manage risk and to do this properly. I talk to so many people out there, different companies doing training, and there's some real terrible companies out there, real scammers that
Mm.
just take your money. And so it took me a long time to decide who to work with. And in the end, I did a course that took 10 months, but both my husband and I were on it. And yeah, it was fantastic, really learning all the rules and regulations, but more than that, the strategies and the mindset as well, because it isn't just about the theory, it's about putting it into practice.
Well, that's it. You've touched on a few points that I want to come back to, but going back to the beginning, you're in the corporate world. You're working long hours, a long commute. I mean, a typical day. How long was a commute for you into work and everything? Really? Yeah. So you're left with a few hours at the end of the night, really.
Oh yes, I think we lived for the weekends. And then, as I wrote in my book, it was quite emotional, actually. I remember the feeling on Sunday of thinking, I've got to get back into work tomorrow morning. I've got to get ready. I've got to get into that zone again. And it just wasn't me. This was
Mm.
not what my life was all about. So looking back, I know that so many people are in that rat race, and I call it that because it really does feel like that. But you think that everybody does it, that there is no choice. But there absolutely is, if you can start to understand how assets can work. And it isn't just property, there's business assets. Once you start working for yourself, you start to understand that you can make corporate decisions yourself for your own strategy and your own future, rather than putting all your effort into a business, a corporate, someone else's strategy. And that's really what the light bulb moment really for me, once I gave up my job, which was really a couple of years after we started. When I actually gave up my corporate job, it was a pretty scary moment for me, but I knew that from the rental income that we were getting, that we would be fine. It just, having worked in corporate life for over 20 years, 22 years, for me it was, my goodness, I'm not going to get that salary every month. That little security blanket, whether I'm working.
It's a big change, isn't it? If you're reliant on that money for a lot, for that amount of time. And you decide, was there little moments that added up to the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak? Had you thought about leaving the corporate world before? And, those Sundays when you said you're dreading going in, did they add up over time, and then enough was enough when you heard about the pension situation and everything?
I think, I'd grown up with the understanding that you work your whole life and then you can retire. But if you're very lucky, you can retire early, maybe with a package, if you can get redundancy. And if you're lucky, my father retired at 55, and I thought, well, I definitely want to beat that if I can. But how on earth can you do it? When we have liabilities, I had a company car, I had a very large mortgage, and it was just like, really, how is this possible? Did it add up over time? Well, I suppose it did, but you just get used to it. I was getting a lot of illness, a lot of sickness through, trains and tube trains and things. I did leave the bank and started doing some work with the NHS, thinking that would be so much easier. But it wasn't really. It was closer to home. But, with my jobs, they were pretty senior roles, a lot of responsibility, and, that does take its toll, I suppose.
Yeah, of course.
But taking on property, of course, became another job on top of that. So both John and myself were working full time and learning, and that was huge. What we had to do was really find more time in our days to study and to put into practice what we were learning. And looking back, that was pretty exhausting. But because we were doing it with a real goal in mind, it was okay. Because we knew it was building our future. We just didn't know how successful we were going to be. And yes, we were very successful. I think we were top performers of Simon Zucchi's mastermind program that year, and we just didn't believe that was possible, and it was great. We loved what we were doing. It was hard work, but when you work out the economics of buying a property, hopefully from a motivated seller, creating a really nice property for somebody else to rent and to live in, and to achieve a profit from that, there are ways of doing it the way you can maximize cash flow. We started off with houses of multiple occupation. So apart from that flat that we had, we've sort of pretty much got multi strategies, where primarily HMOs, holiday lets, those sorts of things, to get the cash flow in. That was the primary purpose that first year.
And that's what I want to focus on now, actually, is that strategy. So you started, the whole purpose was to replace your incomes, and you started with a HMO strategy. I've got two questions on that. A, can you explain what a HMO is for people who might not know? And B, why that particular strategy to start off with?
So a house of multiple occupation is a shared house, where the tenants will be renting the room that they live in, so their bedroom, and they can share other shared communal areas like kitchen, lounge, bathrooms. So a bit like a student. Most people think, oh, it's student houses. But what we chose as our tenant type were really workers, people with jobs and young professionals, which we felt we were more in tune with than students. And the reason we chose HMO is that you can, if you can, find something or do something in exactly the right location where the demand is high, you can make a lot more profits from that because you're getting multiple incomes from a number of people. Six is our smallest. No, five bedrooms is our smallest. And with that multiple of number of people, less your costs, you get a much higher return on investment for an HMO. But it comes with lots and lots of rules and regulations. So we absolutely had to learn those and understand those, and are continuing to do so now because things change regularly. So it was it's quite an advanced strategy, I suppose, but because we were learning with experts, it was much easier for us to go down that particular road, and much quicker to replace our income using those.
Yeah, of course. And I guess with that support network around you, with your mentors, that accountability is there as well, and you feel you're not in it alone. I can imagine that it has really, really helped from that point of view. You know there's someone who's paved the way before you, and you can pick up the phone and contact them if you need to, really.
Choosing how we were going to learn, to be honest, because with busy day jobs and family life, trying to do this properly, I absolutely had to have that accountability and coaching and mentoring, and also somebody just nudging me from time to time and saying, have you done what you said you were going to do? Have you phoned that agent? Have you watched that module? And that's why I like to teach this stuff in that way as well, because it really is the difference between taking action or having it on the shelf. There's so much shelf learning that goes on. You buy these courses and you think, great, there it is. I can do that at some point in the future. Even now, we've got a bit more time in our hands. It's still a lot of people just going, oh, this is lovely. What shall I do with my time? If you invest it in your education, you really...
No, I completely agree. I've done courses in the past, and you get what you put into them at the end of the day, and I massively am an advocate of them. And going back to the HMOs and how you were looking at those, I've noticed, I read your book a couple of months ago, and you've got some great case studies, and yes, I can see it there. It's just happened to be placed there nicely. I love that. Yes, absolutely. And you had some great case studies in there about some of the criteria and what you looked for, and the criteria and principles that you were looking for when assessing a deal. Now, can you share some of those with us? Was there certain locations, certain demographics, a minimum number of rooms? Can you share some of those with us, please?
Pretty laser focused on where you're going to invest, but you will have done your homework, and that's all about the learning. Is where did the tenants want to live? So you pick your tenant type, you look at the city or the town that you want to invest in, and you put yourself in their shoes, and you say, where do they want to be living? Where can they easily get a bus or a train to work? Can they even walk to work? Are the shops, pubs and things, places that people can go to locally? And is it a fun place to be, or is it out of town, in the middle of nowhere where the demand is really low? So you've got to learn these very basic things. So yes, we were very focused. I chose 2 places in Southampton, which isn't too far away from where we live, 2 sort of regions in the city that I thought, yeah, this feels right. Walked the streets, talked to local agents, and really narrowed it down to a sort of couple of postcode areas. And then it was just get onto Rightmove, understand, what's out there at the moment, talking to agents, and just going to view properties. And then it's really work the numbers, critical. Mm-hmm. You've got to get the numbers right. It has to cash flow. It has to have some some capacity for voids where you'll still make an income, and you've got to reduce that risk. Really, that's what it's all about. So yeah, we looked at multiple opportunities. You've got to find motivated sellers if you can. Build really good relationships with agents. That's what we were very good at doing, or I particularly was, because I was local. I was much more local than John was, and it suits my sort of skill set. Really, is building that relationship. And then really you can almost get the agents to be looking for stuff for you and bringing things to you, rather than you having to be on the back foot each time. But yes, I mean, building those first few was really critical, because that builds confidence. You're learning all the time, so once you've got that first one, you're learning through that, and then the second one's so much better. When you look at the examples in the book, the case studies, you can see how the return on investment over time increases, because we get smarter at doing it, but also finding opportunities to add a bedroom, to make sure that we're going to get our license in an Article 4 area, and then add value to the property. Loads and loads of examples, and all the names come to mind straight away. It feels like it was only yesterday, but yeah, it's worth the effort to get it right, because they're all doing very well. Actually, I think I've sold 1 HMO. We've got 6, which isn't masses. There's loads of people out there with hundreds of properties, but we've only got 6 HMOs.
Well, that's it. And like you said, you don't need a lot of HMOs to replace your income, because they're such high cash flowing properties as they are. And like you said, going back to adding a bedroom, I mean, that does so many things. It adds more margin to your rental income. It can increase the value of a property. So learning how to do that and spotting properties that have the capability to add a new bedroom is quite, that comes with education, as you've said, really. Well, that's my next question. Actually, there's 2 questions I tend to get asked a lot, and I'm sure you do, and that is, how do you fund the deals and how do you find the deals? And I want to start with funding, because it's one thing to fund one project, it's another thing to fund a portfolio, and no one has an infinite amount of money. So tell us a little bit about how you funded your first deal, and then kind of how that grew into maybe producing a portfolio.
Lots of money, and I think lots of people out there think that, well, I couldn't possibly do property because I haven't got any money, and very few people do have savings, because life is difficult, and we sort of pretty much manage with what comes in and what goes out. So we used what I call, because as ex-banker, it's about gearing, or what do other people call it? Sort of leverage, the yes. L word, absolutely. Leverage. Well, basically it means, use borrowing as best as you can, especially when interest rates are low. So we, in our property, in our own home, we had equity, because we'd owned it for 10 years or more. And that meant that the value had gone up without us doing very much. So what we did was we remortgaged our home, which is actually very easy to do, especially if you're working, because they just go, well, it's existing lending, interest rates this, we'll just add it on. It's one of the cheapest ways of borrowing. So that's what we did. We took money out of that. That was enough to buy the first couple of properties, or to put deposit on the first couple of properties, because really what you're trying to do is maximize your borrowing. This is if you want to do it quickly. Maximize your borrowing at low interest rates, which mortgages tend to be, because they're for 25 years or more. And you've got to put your cash deposits in. So the remortgaging our home gave us cash deposit money plus the buffer, which is always essential. And then from that point on, it's then how do you find other other sources of funds, and that comes from other people who perhaps have got money sitting in a bank or in a business, and they might be interested in getting a better return than leaving it in the bank at a low interest rate. So that's worked extremely well for us, because we were taught very early on to really start telling people what we did, and to connect with people that already know us, and see if people might be interested in sharing some of the profitability. So yeah, we've used other people's money pretty much a few months in, started to borrow for cash flow purposes and building trust with investors. And then, the culmination of that first year, we actually borrowed 100% of money for a purchase of a very large property that we converted to 6 flats. That was a turning point for us, because we suddenly realized that to negotiate a purchase with other people's money for cash meant it was so much easier to negotiate, because we didn't need to borrow the money from anywhere else and all that, the faffing of mortgages.
Just speeds up the process, doesn't it, at the end of the day? Yeah, from that point of view.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility, of course, and
Yes.
you've got to know what you're doing. And you've got to make sure that you don't put other people's money too much at risk. You've got to make very clear decisions. So it's something I love doing, because I see it as a win-win. I was a banker, so I'm comfortable with that. But people I teach, it's an area that has huge fear. Even remortgaging people's homes, there's a big fear factor there, because their parents and their parents' parents taught them that, pay off your mortgage. It's really important. And in some ways it is for some people. So don't overstretch yourself, go within your parameters. But if you're learning with an expert, it helps you expand your comfort zone, because you know that it's worked for somebody else and that they've got knowledge. So, different ways of learning. So money is obviously critical, but there are so many different ways that you can fund projects.
And that's it. And it's about, like you said, expanding your comfort zone, but not going too far outside that you feel completely overwhelmed at the end of the day. And mentoring and working with experts, even your power team, your accountants, your solicitors, that helps mitigate that downside quite drastically at the end of the day.
Yes, absolutely, it does. Yes.
So now I'll move on to that second question of finding the deals. Everyone tends to think, is there a special right move just for property investors to find these deals, or is it how did you go about it? Was it nurturing certain relationships and things like that?
It's constant, really. It's becoming an expert in those areas, geographical areas that you've decided to focus on. If you even, you can go onto Rightmove as often as you want to, you see new things coming up. And because you've been looking regularly, if something's new or if it's sold before and come back on. And following up is critical. So don't assume that just because it says sold subject to contract, that it's actually going to be, off the radar. Always follow up. If there's a property that you may have even offered on and it's not accepted, then follow up, because it could be that somebody's offered too much and they haven't been able to get the mortgage, or something's happened in the chain. One in three offers fall through. So the good thing is to follow up, and the agents will get to know that you're a professional when you do that. There's so many amateurs out there who go, I want a below market value property, I want a motivated seller, and I want something that I can do up, and you think they've heard it all before. They need you to be, genuine and understand the agent's position as well. So that's pretty much where we got most of our properties from, was through agents, interestingly.
So just consistency and following up seem to be absolutely key for finding the right deals, really.
Yes, and then really understanding the vendor's situation. So we did buy from motivated sellers, usually, situation where they find themselves in they want to sell quickly for a number of reasons. And you've got to really, rather than taking advantage of that, you've got to understand it and say, okay, let's see how we can work together. Because you don't always have to buy a property. You could rent it from somebody. You could enable them to get what they need from a property. So there's all sorts of different things, and that's, again, it's a different way of thinking. It's a professional way of thinking, not the amateur way. So again, education comes into it.
No, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I want to move on now to, there are some downsides to property. There are some lessons to be learned, especially early on, like you said. Is there any particular lessons and mistakes you made early that you're kind of glad that you made, because it's helped you to learn faster and move on from there? So is there any that jump out at you at all?
We spent a lot of time trying to negotiate when actually we could have saved time just letting go of it. I think, the shiny pennies, oh my goodness, we could do this, and this with it. And that's where the mentoring or coaching comes in. I'd get to a stage in negotiation when I thought, I really, really want this place. And it was, no, don't, try not to fall in love with something or feel that you've got to a stage where you're nearly there, because it wastes a lot of time. There's plenty of opportunity out there. You've just got to believe that. So we spend a lot of time. There's one in my book, which is Foundry Lane. So I write quite a lot about it because, we spent so much time trying to get that deal to work. So yeah, time wasting. The other thing is finding investors who are happy to invest and then not having a backup. So had an investor, £100,000, would you believe, happy to invest with us, and we thought, happy days, this is really going to work well. And the last minute, I think they were asked, they had a problem. They were going to go into hospital, and they changed their mind. And I'm quite right. They felt that, this was quite a big operation, and they didn't want to put their money into something, and they thought they might, not survive the operation. It was really serious. And I thought, absolutely right. But we had no backup. We didn't even have like a bridging loan there. And that was a massive lesson early on. We nearly lost that deal, but we didn't in the end. It was a lot of work trying to get out of that. But since then, we've always had backup. Even with our sort of big commercial purchases, we've always had a second lender in the background that has already done their due diligence and is prepared to lend. They may be lending at much higher rates, but you just don't know. These things happen, and they're out of your control quite often. So yeah, that was a massive lesson.
COVID-19, we're in a world pandemic at the moment. Have there been any pivots you've had to make during some of your rental portfolio, and are you able to share some of those with us?
My goodness, yes. And I try and put myself into the shoes of some of the people that are learning with me, because if this had happened in my first year, this would have been a very, very scary prospect, because we had one strategy, one tenant type, and that's actually quite risky. So we find ourselves, 5 years on in this situation, and we're very grateful that we've diversified a little bit. So rather than one strategy and one tenant type, we've got multiple. And that's come for a number of reasons. A, because it's sensible in business to do that. But also we've found different strategies that give us higher returns and that are very rewarding, like our guest house business. So we've got 4 businesses now. We've got our residential, sort of holiday lets, HMOs, those sorts of things. And then we've got the guest house business, which we sort of came across by accident. That's large properties, either ex-B&Bs, hotel type properties where we let the rooms on a short-term basis. And that's a trading business. So that's one area we've had to pivot, as you call it.
Yeah.
Rather than booking.com and holiday makers or contractors working, we may have had occupancy maybe 60, 70%. We've turned one of those completely over to street homeless, which sounds a bit dramatic, but it is an area that we have had some expertise in since October last year. So the council approached us and said, we need to be taking people who are living on the streets off the streets for their own good, whether they want to or not. And so we've given them a 24-bed property which is all street homeless. So it's been hard, but it means we're getting an income from the council from it, and we are having to manage that through this time. And because we'd done it before, it was less risky, I suppose. And we've still got one guest house that's only got 5 people out of 15 rooms, because we just can't take new people in there unless they're en suite rooms. So that's tricky. So we can balance the income from, the upside and the downside. And then we've got a development of 8 houses just finished for a lovely Easter launch, which never quite happened. So we've got a show home and, lovely 8 4-bed houses in Andover. So, we'll just put that off a little bit. We hope that it won't be for too many months. And the lender's happy, the investors are happy. We're just communicating with everybody regularly. And then we've got a sale that we think we're going to complete on today. So,
that'd be great.
I hear my husband jumping up and down and screaming. Done it. It's been very touch and go, I must admit. We've given them additional 4 weeks. So yeah, absolutely. This is what it's like being in business. It's important. You have to diversify. And, we've had the time to do that before such a crisis has hit. But I'm a positive person, and I like to think positively, so that I think that helps. The fear factor stops a lot of people. It stops people from even starting, I can tell you.
Yeah, and I'll certainly be getting onto that mindset soon. And like you said, once the dust starts to settle a little bit, you're able to think a bit more clearly and look at all your options, really. And that goes back to your criteria when looking for deals. You said that you look for certain locations, you look for town centres and things like that straight away you can let to different types of tenants. So if the market does change for whatever reason, and no one could ever have predicted this, those guest houses could be let out to different people, and straight away that just, the right location helped there massively.
Location, economies of scale, teamwork, network. As soon as this thing started to happen, I don't think we quite believed it would be as bad. So starting to talk with people in your network and starting to listen to experts. Not too many. There's a lot of gurus out there on Facebook now who are telling us what's going to happen in the next few months. I have not got a clue how some of these people get their information, and don't listen to it. Some of it, it's just it isn't right. So you've got to filter out the too much information, but work with people that you know and trust, people that have got some expertise already. And just talking and communicating is half the battle, because that helps your mind, helps you build your confidence and feel a little bit better. I've connected people with my expert team, with my professionals, my lettings experts, because they've had tenant difficulties, or they just haven't, got the skills quite, as to how to communicate properly and effectively. And, I'm happy to share my network. I don't get paid for that. It's just really important. I've got great people. I don't mind sharing that, as long as it doesn't take up too much of their time. But that's where I spent a lot of time, John and I sitting down, really working out what our plan is. What's our plan in the worst case situation? What's our plan now? And how do we need to change that? And almost weekly we're going, okay, let's look at that again. Is that going to work? What do we need to do? Do we need to have another conversation? Do we need to talk to the lender? And that's ongoing. It's been busy, actually, really, really busy.
No, it's very much what we're doing. Like you said, you have plans in place and you reassess as you go along, and that's all you can do at this point, really. And I think you've already touched on this, but knowing what we know now about the impact of a pandemic, and you have your property criteria, is there anything new that you would implement into that criteria and those principles looking at the next projects or the next deals?
Well, I think cash is king suddenly.
Absolutely.
Having a bit of a buffer there has been very, very important. the sale of this property that we're hoping to complete on today, you know, we've been quite worried if that wasn't going to happen, because we're quite reliant on that money giving us that cash and that buffer, but also for new things that we're doing and paying off our investors. You know, that's really important to us. So I think, you know, that the different shift now is more to cash. You know, if you've got investors who've got cash and they're investing with you, you know, if you're able to pay them back, they're happy to invest again. Obviously, you've got to be so careful at the moment with the criteria, but there will be opportunities for sure for that next investment. So I think about cash, think about who you know who has cash in your business, and don't rely too much on bank lenders out there who don't really care, to be perfectly honest. They've changed criteria between exchange and completion. They've changed their loan to value. And I understand why they've done that. I have put my banker hat on now and go, right, yeah, there's rules and regulations. But when you're in business, it just doesn't seem fair. Whereas you can negotiate with people and talk to investors, and you can explain and you can talk about risk. With a banker, they can just make decisions for you without really too much concern. So cash is important. We've looked at stocks and shares, of course, and how they've plummeted. Stocks and shares isn't necessarily a great investment. It is long term, but if you want to make decisions quickly, you can't rely on stocks and shares being there at the time that you need it. So I think property is still the place to be. You know, it certainly is, unless you absolutely have to sell for some reason. Then you're reliant on the market as it is. But you know, one of the 5 golden rules that I teach and have been taught is, you know, buy for the long term. Don't buy short term to flip necessarily, because you're beholden to the marketplace that you can't impact. So yeah, that's my views at this moment in time.
No, of course, and you know, that's been really helpful. I'm sure it's going to be helpful to people listening as well. I do want to move on to mindset a little bit, and like you said, you've touched on numerous amount of times throughout this chat so far how important it is. You know, some people put it on the shelf, never get off the ground. Why do some people take a few years to replace their income, and some people take a bit longer? You know, are there some behaviors that you can think of that you've done that you attribute some of your success to?
Yes, they're all in my book. Honestly, there's so much that I reflected on when I was writing this, because I think that's what's valuable to other people is to think, you know. So yes, I did learn with an expert. I did learn with somebody who was very thoughtful about your mindset, and that was very helpful. But I think the key thing is the fear factor. Now, fear for me is false expectations appearing real, that acronym. False expectations appearing real. It's believing all that negativity out there. So if I listened to the media at the moment, you know, there's going to be a massive recession. Property prices are going to, you know, disappear through the floor. It's going to be a terrible place to invest. Tax, oh my goodness, you know, it's the worst possible place. You know, keep your cash under a mattress. That's what that's what fear does. Fear, you know, makes you listen to all that negative stuff, and it's a spiral down. If you can understand and get a great education, and you can talk to people who understand this stuff, who have been there before. Now, I wasn't in there the last recession, but I know that people got the best possible deals when they were investing in 2008. I only started investing in 2014, 15. So I haven't been there, but I'm learning with people who have. And I'm listening to people who've got experience of this, and they are positive people who go, listen to me, this is what you need to be thoughtful about, because they've been there and done it. So fear is the primary reason why people don't take action, or they're doing it without knowledge. So they don't want to pay for their education, they don't want to invest in themselves. They'll go, that's okay, I can watch YouTube videos and read books, that's okay. And you can. but you end up making mistakes, little mistakes that you just didn't necessarily think about or didn't know about. And then you find, oh my goodness, this hasn't worked for me. Or they find themselves, that they're going to have to either sell the property or do something because they haven't got that buffer. And what happens then is they then tell all their friends, well, this property thing, it doesn't work. I tried it, it doesn't work. We all know people who are like that. But you've got to sort of do this. You've got to try not to think to the naysayers and listen to the naysayers, and try to just accept that there are people like that. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But just try not to listen to it. Try to put yourself in places where you've got the positive people who are wanting to help and wanting to learn together, and that will give you that comfort, and it will help with the fear. Then there's the comfort zone. I touch on comfort. It's something I teach and present at a lot. You're only really wanting to just get to that next level of comfort on your circle, and then the next one, and then the next one. You can jump from one and skip one if you want to, but it's very, very uncomfortable. It's possible. But as you go along, as long as you've got support and control, you can move quite quickly through your level of comfort zones. But you've just got to do it knowing that you're feeling uncomfortable for a reason, and it isn't because you're doing the wrong thing. It's just because you've not done it before.
A lot of people probably thinking, well, I've got no experience in property at this point. It's probably too late. I can't get into it now. But I'm sure for you, there was skills that were transferable from your corporate life, from your banking life. At the end of the day, you understood certain things about finance, and people might not have been in that role, but communication skills, organisation, things like that can be transferred over. Were there any particular skills from your previous job, from your corporate job, that really have helped you moving forward in property?
Well, lots. And I think that's one of the key things to understand when you're starting out is what strengths have you got, and where are the areas that you're going to need support in. We did something called Wealth Dynamics, which is a profiling of your skill set as an entrepreneur. It's a really useful tool. And that's for myself and my husband doing it as well. And because we're working closely together, it was really, really useful to understand why I love doing some things and hate doing other things. And he's the opposite. And rather than just get frustrated and take 10 times as long to do something, recognize that actually maybe you shouldn't be doing that type of thing. Maybe you should get an expert, someone else to do it for you, and you focus on your strengths. So we've all got strengths and we've all got weaknesses, and over time you tend to enjoy stuff that you're good at. So again, there's no point in going into property investing if you're going to end up hating everything you do. It's not easy, absolutely isn't. But if you're doing the things that you're good at and you know that it's going to work well, then why not? So that's one of the things to focus on early on. Is it too late? It doesn't matter what age you start. To be perfectly honest, I had a coaching call this morning with a gentleman who's 65, and he's got a couple of properties, but he just hasn't understood how it works. And he's so excited about building his portfolio now. And equally, I've got an 18-year-old, believe it or not, an 18-year-old who's bought my program, who's just really enjoying the knowledge that she's gaining and starting to think about as soon as she can get a mortgage, or even working with someone else who can get a mortgage, she can start learning the skills and the not getting the knowledge of this sort of thing. How amazing is that? So I know when I started, I thought, I've only got a finite amount of time. I really want to replace my income. I was very focused on that. But I thought, my goodness, there's so much competition out there. How will I find just the right property when there's all these other people wanting to do the same thing? But it absolutely is not the case. There's a lot of opportunity if you know what you're doing, but there's so many amateurs out there. doing this stuff. So as soon as I found an opportunity, and I thought, oh my goodness, all my network will know this property, and of course they didn't. I'd start telling them about it, and they go, oh, that sounds great. How can we help you? We're not competing. We want to help you get this to work. So always a good time to start. It's always a good time to invest, no matter what, as long as you understand the marketplace. And it doesn't really matter on your age either. It's amazing how many lenders are lending buy-to-let mortgages for people who are older, because they're lending against the asset, not the individual. So yeah, it's a great market out there for people with different skill sets. You've just got to really understand how you can get your team and all the skills together is going to give you enough to really make this work for you. So yeah.
No, that's brilliant, Bronwen. No, thanks very much. We're getting towards the end now of our meeting. I just want to go back to the travelling, because you've achieved something there that is what people strive their whole lives to do, to retire early and go travelling if they wanted to. I believe your husband John was sailing around the world when you were travelling. I mean, had he had much experience sailing before?
Well, he'd had a little bit, but years before. And what he'd set himself was to come down to the south coast near where we are now, to Southampton, and to join a sailing club and to do more sailing. But he met me, and with 2 children, was very, very little time for him to do it. So he, one of the first things he said was, if we can create more freedom and more time in our lives, that's what he wanted to do more of. So, the key for us, not only replacing our income, but was to make sure that we didn't manage our own properties. So as soon as we got a buy-to-let property, we always found an expert to manage it for us, to do the contracts, to do the management day to day, because what we didn't want to do was create another job. And that's so easy to do. And a lot of people do that because it sort of seems easy at the time. But for us, we were working full time. We had our goals, and we said that as soon as we possibly could, we would look at those dreams and see if we could make those a reality. So what we did was, year 3 of investing was the year when we said, how do we stop and enable us to get the time to do other things? And one of our agents in Portsmouth, his girlfriend had she'd just come back from doing the Clipper Around the World yacht race. She'd done one of the legs around Australia, and she was flying back. And we had dinner with her and our agent. And John's eyes, she were just like saucers. He was like, I want to do that. I want to do that. But when he signed up and he was interviewed, and they said to him, once they approved everything, they said to him, well, which legs around the world, which races do you want to do? Now, he'd always talked about crossing an ocean. How amazing would that be to go, do the Atlantic or do the Pacific or the Southern Ocean? Absolutely, phenomenal. But I said to him, why don't you do all of it? And that's a very, very rare thing. Not many people ever do the whole thing. And, he was like, I'm not quite sure you really understand what's involved here. 12 months. Up to 12 months, and it's a lot of endurance, but equally I knew deep down that he was challenged by that. That would be amazing. So we set our goal as doing that. We had to raise the money. It's the only amateur yacht race in the world, run by Sir Robin Knox Johnston, amazing guy. But you pay to do it. You have to pay for each leg. And you have to pay for your equipment, the stopovers and things. But, it was just another goal for us. And it was, if we want this enough, we'll do it. But also, if we don't raise enough money, that's fine. We just do some of the legs. And one is enough. But in the end,
it's
all of it. Yeah.
Fantastic accomplishment at the end of the day to be able to do that. And when you guys set goals, you really know how to set goals. And you travelled the world. I mean, what happened? What did you get up to in your adventures?
So I followed him around the world and went to every port that they stopped in, even the ones that weren't formal stopovers like Panama. Um, I just I took it as a endurance for me as well, even though I wasn't sailing. I just thought, well, if our business can survive just a few weeks using a laptop and phone, then why shouldn't I? Why couldn't I continue? John was very keen that I did because he wanted me to have my own adventures. So I volunteered in Namibia. That was a fantastic chance for me.
Wow.
So it's the background to my phone still now. I set that as my dream to do that when I had the time. So I volunteered at a wildlife sanctuary there called Nankuse, which I absolutely loved. And I hope to go back there this year for several months. And that was amazing. I absolutely loved it. So I did that. I volunteered in New Zealand, a place that John has never been. And I planted trees, cut back pathways, and volunteered with the group there on the South Island. So that was brilliant. And of course, going to all these different continents was an adventure in itself. Often traveling on my own. I had I had my business with me, which is my coaching and mentoring business, my education business, which I set up just 3 months before we left, because I really wanted that as my business, something I enjoy doing. I love to inspire and teach people. And with Simon Zucchi's blessing, it was great actually to create this online program. And then I found myself coaching people with my headset on, looking out into the beautiful blue ocean of the Whitsundays, on the balcony at 5 o'clock in the morning, coaching somebody for an hour. They didn't know where I was. I didn't need to tell them quite often. It wasn't important to them. But for me, I've got those precious moments that just come back to me time and time again, that how blessed was I to be able to do that, and the technology, of course. So we're using that now. How great is that we can feel like we're in the same room, chatting away, and enable us to do things in different ways. So writing this book, we actually went back to the Whitsundays, which is our favourite place, which is just off the northern Queensland coast in Australia. And we went back there with a purpose to write books. So I wrote mine. John is still writing his. His is a really cathartic thing for him. It's really important that he relives almost those legs and those highs and lows, and records that for him, but for members of the family, for other people if they're inspired by that. But to actually go through that, because it's quite hard when you're doing it to remember. But he's kept a blog. He kept a blog every day. He blogged, and I put that on his Facebook page and his website. So he's got all that material that he can use, which is tremendous. So yeah, it was great, really great to have the time to do that. So yeah, property's given us that. It's given us the ability to have that freedom and to travel and to work anywhere in the world. So yeah, luckily we're in the UK now though. So.
Yes, absolutely. But in terms of an inspirational story and freedom that it's created for you is unbelievable. I mean, is there any working remotely? Just a couple more questions. Was there any particular system that if you were doing it again, you would put in place? Were you still looking at deals and things when you were away at all?
Yes, we absolutely were. So we said, at some point we had to stop, but what we did was to continue to build our guest house business, because that was actually proving to be very popular, a very good return on investment. And because we built up the team, it made sense for us to continue to look at opportunities there to expand. So we did that. We didn't buy. So we did a purchase lease option on a property, and we did a long lease on a property over the last couple of years. And then while we were in Australia writing our books, we actually exchanged on a property in Addlestone in Surrey, which is an office block. That was brought to us by our connections, by our network, by our joint venture partner. And we were able to raise money for that, even though we weren't in the UK. That was from our investors and from people that we know, and they know us. So we we were able to exchange on that. We had to come home obviously to complete, and we did that. We were back in November last year, so yeah, that worked very well. So we are still doing deals. We're still finding opportunities, which is great. We're just not doing as many of the residential property purchases now. Yeah, it's still fun. We're enjoying it. We're working with experts, and yeah, continuing to learn, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's the plan for the future then? Is there any more adventures on the horizon, or any other projects that you're going to be looking to do?
Yes, we should be in Australia at the moment, so that was our plan, was to go back.
Yes, I remember.
We have some friends in Brisbane who we were going to go to Uluru with, to the Red Centre. That would be a 6-week expedition with some friends. So we will still do that probably next year now. We've got our volunteering in Namibia, which John hasn't done and would like to join me, which would be brilliant. They absolutely need volunteers out there, so that's great. So we're going to aim to do probably a few months later this year. Watch this space. I'm still teaching people, which I love to do. So the book launched just a couple of months ago now. So that's still important that I get that out there, and I can reach a wider audience with a book, because people do like to read books first. Quite often it's what we did. We read a book first and then did a bit more, research. I've got a SAS, a small self-administered scheme pension, a SAS. That's where I'm my own trustee of my pension, which requires quite a lot of, making sure that we're managing that effectively. We're going to be buying one of our purchase lease options through the SAS, because the SAS can buy a commercial property. So that's really neat. We'll be working quite hard on that in the next 6 to 12 months. And yeah, the next deal on the horizon. It's always there. And
absolutely.
Yeah, hoping that will come about probably in the next couple of months.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities coming up on the horizon if people just got to keep, like you said, following up and keep at it and stay in the game. Bronwen, I'm going to start to wrap things up there. Thank you very much for your time and for such an inspirational story. If people want to find you and get to know you a bit more, where can they find you?
You can find me on social media with a name like mine. It's Bronwen Verncombe. It's not difficult to find. I have a website, Property Investing Foundation. But again, if you find me on social media, message me. I'll connect you in different ways. Always love to talk. So I have a diary booking system. You can book half an hour to have a chat, and that's always valuable. Just because we can help each other quite often. So yeah, buy my book on Amazon. Yeah, it's also on Audible.
I can certainly recommend it. It was a great read. It's not the longest book, which is even better sometimes, and but there's plenty of information and plenty of case studies in there to help. So I can certainly recommend it.
Lots of pictures as well. That's important.
Absolutely. Bronwen, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for joining us today, and
thanks again. Take care.
Yeah, cheers.